budget workshop. And so I will call this meeting to order on this 13th day of August at 8:43 a.m. And we will start with a discussion and consideration of matters regarding the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget preparation, including but not limited to 1, the major funds, revenue, and expenditures, and 2, other items needing council directions. So I'm assuming, Tina, that you are on and leading us in this project.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
Okay.
you. Tina Diersky, Director of Finance. Good morning, Mayor, Council, and Mr. Valenzuela. Today is our opportunity to discuss the other major funds, which means basically other than our general fund, and those are funds that are in excess of a $1 million budget. So we'll just get right into it unless anyone has any questions before we start. Okay. So our major funds this year are the Water Fund, the Water Reclamation Fund, Solid Waste, Stormwater, Airport, State Office Building, Fort Concho, Hotel Occupancy Tax, Civic Events, and the Development Corporation. So we'll go through each of those slide by slide, and we'll stop on each of the slides to answer whatever questions you might have about those funds. We've also invited the directors, the relative directors, to be here to answer questions as well if you have questions for them.
And Tina, because this is a televised meeting, would you also make sure that as you talk about, for example, Water Enterprise Fund, you all know very well what that fund is. Describe the fund before we start the process of talking about the fund, so everybody
Sure.
understands what the numbers are relevant to.
Yes. So the first fund we'll discuss is the Water Fund. Of course, the Water Fund is funded mostly through water sales. It is meant to operate as a business and fund all of its operations through those revenues that it generates. So the change in the water budget this year for revenue for water sales is an increase of $2.1 million. This is being budgeted in accordance with the water rate plan that was adopted about 5 years ago, or I think it was 4 years ago now. And the final rate increase for that will go into effect on January 1 of 2020.
So this would be following the water study to build up the monies that we need for future projects, and the last of the 5-year increases in water sales is January 2020. So this is reflecting of that 6 or that 9-month increase that would be in this budget.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Continue.
Okay, so other revenues includes lake use revenues, taps and connections, paving cuts, lease proceeds, sale of material, farm lease, auction proceeds, and interest income. And there is an increase in that line of $692,000.
You want to explain that increase?
Allison, do you want to?
The lady with the information and the numbers.
Good
Come
morning,
on.
Mayor and Council. So we have an increase in our billing and collection fee. That would be our late fees. We went down in our revenue budget projection last year to $1.2 million with the change that we did with the 15% rather than the $25 flat fee. We still see that coming in at we've budgeted $1.4 million in that fund, or in that line this year, so we didn't really see a decrease there. The other ones are interest income. So with the Lake Nasworthy Trust Fund that we were talking about, with the $16 million, 90% of the interest from that money comes to the operating fund for the water fund, and it is used to fund lake operations and lake patrol. So there was an increase there and a slight increase in transfers in from our sewer fund to help fund some of our operations that do work both in water and sewer, as well as our customer service billing department to help fund those costs that are fully out of the water department.
Would you explain to the best of your information the new collection agency that we've hired, how that's working, and then number 2, what you think the impact will be on the new conservation program?
Okay. Billing and collection, I've received word that they are doing a good job. They're being aggressive on especially those new customers that they're getting, and they're working through some of those older ones. It does take time since there are, I believe, several thousand of those customers that they are going through their database and sending out letters and going through their protocol for collecting. But we are seeing good results from the first few months of them being under contract with us and getting our collections data. As far as the conservation side, we've budgeted in, or the $2.1 million increase would be also inclusive of not giving the conservation discounts any further. But in our expense budgets, we have built in the low-income assistance and the elderly assistance programs.
Let's stop right there and just ask if council has any questions on the revenue, sales, or other lines on the water fund.
I have a couple of questions, Mayor. Allison, under the revenues where we were down, lake use revenues and taps and connections, would you tell me what's in lake use revenues and taps and connections?
So with lake use revenues, we do get some of the lease proceeds from those lake lots that are still under lease. As we continue to sell those properties, which we are selling quite a few right now, that decreases the amount of lease that is coming to our fund. So it is going to the principal of the Lake Nasworthy Trust Fund when they sell that property, but we're no longer receiving that lease payment. So that's one of the bigger drivers of the lake use revenues being decreased. The other, with the taps and connections being decreased, so that taps and connections line includes paving cuts, service, the $20 activation fee, as well as tap charges, and an after-hours policy or an after-hours turn-on, and we saw a decrease in that usage, and so we adjusted that accordingly. The after-hours, they pay an additional $50 to have their service turned on after hours or wait till the next business day, and we're seeing that they're waiting till the next business day.
And just to further clarify the taps and connections, one might assume that as we build new homes that the taps would increase, but that really is covered, that tap is covered by the builder of the home correctly and not
Correct. New
through-
subdivisions that are going in, excuse me, they're putting those taps in as they build the street and all those type of developments. And the taps that we do inside the city limits that are done by our department are kind of few and far between compared to the development that we see in the outer parts of town.
Okay. Lucy, you have a question?
Yes, you were talking about the collection agency, Allison. How many months are we into this?
I don't have that exact number with me.
You don't know how
sorry.
long we've been on
It's been
it?
less than a year,
Yes.
so
And it took several months to get the contract signed, get them the data, those type of things.
Because I wanted to know how we were doing compared to the old agency that we
No, but I
used.
can get y'all a
Okay.
report on that.
All right. My other question was, can you go over again the discount program and what was it for the water for the elderly?
conservation
Yeah,
program.
conservation program.
Yes.
Real quick, just to touch on it so that our viewers can.
In lieu of the conservation discounts, we went with 3 different programs, one of them being a conservation program, which is the showerhead and aerator program. We have ordered those kits, and we are waiting for their ship date. And once we have that, we'll schedule time to basically advertise a full day to customers that want to come in and receive one of those kits. But the other 2 programs that we implemented were low-income assistance programs. Those are administered through Concho Valley Community Action Agency in the basement of the Cactus. One is a low-income assistance program, so they can receive a one-time payment to their utility bill if they meet the income levels based on their household size. And the other one is a senior assistance program where they can receive a discount off the first tier, which is the first 2,000 gallons of their bill, if they sign up through that program.
Question: if you're eligible for the low income program, can you do that and then also the senior assistant, or is it just one or the
It's
other?
an either-or program.
Thank you.
Right now, we've started that program in the month of July and dedicated $50,000 to that program. And I can tell you in the month of July, they spent over $20,000 back to the customers. So I think we'll see that that $50,000 will last about 2 to 3 months.
All right. Do I have further questions? Billy, did
I
you?
have one other, and I'm not sure if this is Tina or you, Allison, but if I look in the Blue Book, it shows that our current budget for the taps and connection is 378.2, and then we're budgeting for 315.2. Why are we budgeting less? Is that Tina or Allison?
Blue Book is Tina. But just from my thought, the Blue Book is including some other accounts that this one is not
It
including.
is, that's exactly correct. It's just grouped differently. So the Blue Book amount has, if you'll look at taps and connection budget for the original budget for FY19, it's $328,000. So you're comparing that number with the 315. The 378 in the Blue Book is just grouped, a different accounting group. So she has different accounts grouped in with that.
So that's the difference in the 378.2 and the 328.2?
Yes.
Because it says our 19 original budget in the Blue Book says 378.2.
Yes, ma'am. In the Blue Book, paving cuts are grouped in with taps and connections, and that budget is $50,000. So it's just grouped differently in the Blue Book.
Okay. Billy, is that the end of your question on that?
For right now, I guess.
Okay, no, just on that one. We'll move on to any further questions on the revenue, sales, and other budget lines. All right, we're going to go down to expenditures and personnel, which, if you will explain, the $290,000 increase is not a pure increase, but it is a what?
There is no personnel increase or no personnel count increase. So minor increases in the healthcare, FICA, workman's comp, those type of things. But we also had a few employees that were coded to the sewer fund that weren't supposed to be. They work in the water division, and so we got those corrected in our system, and so that's why the increase in the personnel.
All right, so basically, if you went back without all of those accounting adjustments, we would be planning that flat to the 18-19 budget.
Correct, with the minor increases with the
Benefits.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, operation and maintenance is an increase of $2,349,676. So tell us about that increase.
O&M increases, we are using all of 260 water fund to fund our debt this year versus we've split it between the capital account and the 260 account previously. But we are using the entire water fund to use for debt, and that way our capital account is strictly dedicated for cash flowing and keeping up with the street program. So it's just an accounting function change, if I'm saying that correctly.
Before she was funding her debt service, both from 260 and from Fund 512, which is the Water Capital Fund. And so now she's just funding all of her debt service payments out of Fund 260. And so that increase, you would have seen a decrease on the Fund 512 Capital Fund that correlates to the increase on the Fund 260 side.
And we made a decision to do that because,
There was no rhyme or reason of the split. We have capital and debt service coming from both 260 and 512. I wanted it to look cleaner so that everything, sometimes it was a 70-30 split on the debt payment, 80-20. And so wanted to use capital for capital or cash flowing capital and using our O&M budget to pay for the debt service previously incurred.
okay. So,
And there's, sorry.
go ahead, no, go
Two
ahead.
more increases relative to the operations and maintenance. One with our payment to CRMWD for next year's estimate. They have some projects going on at Lake Ivy, and they are doing cathodic protection, communications upgrade. But one of the projects out at the dam at Lake Ivy required about a $200,000 to $300,000 increase from what we normally budget for O&M with CRMWD. So there's an increase there. And the other one is about a $677,000 increase to our electrical budget at the water treatment plant. We've been under a 1 cent agreement with AEP for a very long time. So versus paying the 3.8 or 4 cents per kilowatt plus the line charges that we do with JEXA and our TCAP rate, we've been paying 1 cent per kilowatt at the water treatment plant. And so that ends December 31st, 2019. So January 1, we will be under new rates with our electrical.
Is the 4 cent rate considered a good rate? I mean, or are we making up for the years of being at 1 cent?
The rate that it will go to is the negotiated rate through TCAP, which is a co-op that we use for buying power, basically, a state-level organization. And we went through extensive negotiations about
We
2
actually
or 3
bid that
years
one
ago.
at that time.
Yeah.
We went through a bid process.
We did,
That
you're
was
right.
the lowest bid, and so at the time we got that was. We do hear about other rates now, but these rates are locked in for a few more years, and so when
The
we have
rates locked in for how long?
I
these
believe it
rates,
expires in 2022.
So for 2 years. All right. And so that is the AEP rate? I mean, is that,
That is,
JEXA is the supplier.
Is the supplier, yes.
all right. Okay, so those are the big line item increases, Allison?
Yes, relative to the O&M increases.
Okay. Do I have questions for Allison on O&M?
On that-
Dollar
I'm
amounts,
sorry.
Billy?
On that 2.3 increase, you said debt service and the rate increase, and there was one other thing you mentioned.
The CRMWD increase for
Thank you.
Lake Ivy.
And that's, I think you said about 300,000, so it's a
Yes.
one-time only, maybe, one-time only hit.
Yes, because that project, most of CRMWD's projects can last several years, especially if they're doing like cathodic protection or communications upgrades. So we'll pay for those projects or our portion over a course of 2 to 3 years. But this project that they're doing out at the dam is just a one-time. They'll complete it in one fiscal year, so we'll pay for it one time.
Okay.
Our portion's 300, or is that split between the members?
Our portion.
Our
is
portion
the-
is 300.
That's what I wanted to say.
I think it's a little over a $2 million project.
Do I have further questions or comments on the O&M? All right, go to capital.
Sorry, I wanted to have all my information together. As far as capital and the increase there, this is where a portion of this is to keep up with the street program, but a large portion of this $5.8 million that we're budgeting is set aside for the Hickory debt that we are planning on issuing this upcoming fiscal year regarding the drilling of 5 additional wells, booster pump capacity, and treatment capacity. That placeholder is $3.9 million for that first year of debt service, and I worked with Tina to get that number. So outside of that 5.8, or the 3.9 to get to the 5.8 is machinery, vehicles, and those type of things, and water line replacement projects.
The water line replacement, is that the Bell Street? Is that primarily the Bell Street project?
No, Bell Street is already accounted for outside of all of these dollars. So this would be more like a College Hills. We are looking at the 18-inch line repair that needs to be done, or replacement, not just repair, along Randolph and MLK on the south side of the loop that we've had some issues with. Those are the type of projects that would be paid for from those dollars.
Do I have questions from council? If so, raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you. Looks like there's no questions or comments. So let's move on from the water fund to the next fund.
The next fund we have up for discussion is the Water Reclamation Fund. Of course, again, the main source of revenue in this is the charges for your sewer service. There is an increase in the revenue in that fund as well, also in line with the water rate plan that went into effect in 2016.
Okay, so this would be the last year of the 5-year increase in
Here
rates?
as well, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the other line is 148,000, and it is what?
It includes farm use revenues, connections, paving cuts, auction proceeds, sale of property, and interest. And I can repeat those. I can
So,
repeat that
so
fast.
the water use revenues is what? Is that from the city farm?
Yes.
Farm use revenues.
Yes, that would be the the city farm leases.
So those leases are going down because we've changed.
I think that
What we've done?
in last year's budget, we still had the OE renewable energy lease built in, as well as we've taken some ranch property out of some of the leases in hopes to enter into a solar farm lease. So if we do get to enter into the solar farm lease, I would expect this revenue to, we didn't budget for it, just to be conservative, because we aren't under contract yet. But I do plan to meet at least last year's budget if we do get that.
Right, and so the taps and connections, the explanation would be the same from the the water
Yes,
enterprise
just more in
fund.
line with what we're actually seeing as far as doing taps and connections.
And then your interest on the fund balance is the 182,622, so that's interest on fund balance.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Do I have from council any questions for Allison on the Fund 270 revenues? No one's raising their hand, so my assumption means that you can move on to the expenses.
The expenses as far as personnel is the same. This one is smaller than the other one because we just have those supplemental or the insurance, FICA, workman's comp increases. So minor, but once again, no personnel increases as far as the total number of people.
On your operations and maintenance, 562,588 increase.
One of those being the same thing as the 260, where we are going to fund all the debt from 270 rather than a split from 270 and 520. We wanted to fund all of the debt from the operating account and leave all of 520 to cash fund sewer projects, such as the Bell Street, College Hills, those type of projects.
Okay. And your capital of $1.3 million.
Hold on just one second.
I believe that's also a placeholder for an expected debt issue should we do the sewer project at Lake Nagsworthy.
Yes,
Okay.
so with the 4.6, 2.2 million of that is set aside to issue the full amount for the main if it's needed. And then the other parts of that would go towards clay pipe replacement, those type of projects.
Okay. Billy, do you have a question? Lane? Lucy? No, ma'am. Tom? Tommy? Harry? With no questions, we will accept the budget proposal for the Water Reclamation 270 Fund. And that moves us into the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund.
Okay, so the primary revenue source for the solid waste fund is user fees, which were structured to fund the eventual permitting of a new landfill site on the 320 acres already owned and dedicated for that purpose.
All right, Shane, do you want to come forward for any potential questions? You're our man.
Dartboard up.
Okay, so right now, we're forecasting a small increase in the landfill fees. Talk about what's going on at the landfill.
The landfill, everything's kind of going kind of as we planned, and we've seen it kind of moving forward over the years. But our increases that we're seeing are our annual increases that annually go up based on the contract requirements of the lease, and then also our tonnage is actually increasing at the landfill as well too. Not only from at the landfill side, which is the tonnage going across the scales at the landfill, but also our collections here in town are also going up. So,
Okay. And the other, which is an increase of 109,000?
in our other, that includes hauling permits, that includes our farm leases, that includes our interest on the account, and it also includes liquidated damages if there's any notices of violations, any things like that from the landfill or any of those things. Those type issues go into the other account. So, and we've seen an increase. We have three or four outside haulers other than Republic that are actually using our streets and using our landfill. So. Six Nations with Goodfellow Air Force Base, Texas Disposal Systems at Angelo State. Those type people are also have permits to actually use our streets and use our landfill.
So right now, based off of our landfill, about how many project a ballpark number of years that are left on the existing landfill?
On the existing landfill, as our permit stated today, we have between 13 and 15 years is the average that we're running at right now, based on compaction rates and based on kind of a projected intake over the next 13 to 15 years. That's kind of the lifespan we have left.
So we have two options. One, increase the height of the landfill and request that, and/or look at the land for an additional or the new landfill. So we have options, but
Correct.
we have 15 years left on the existing.
As the permit stands today, we have 13 to 15 years. And so as we start moving closer, we've kind of already started looking, staff internally has kind of already started looking at some of the options that may be available to us, whether that is just doing a permit modification, increasing the height, kind of looking what those numbers look like versus actually going out and acquiring a new permit for the new land that we have there to see what right now is the most viable and the best option for the city at this point.
Okay. I'm going to ask council if they have questions for Shane on this solid waste enterprise fund.
I just have a
What,
question.
Lucy?
What was the interest from that we have down here?
Fund balance.
Our fund
balance.
balance, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Now, we all know that interest rates are going down, so we've planned conservatively on the interest rate here on these budgets on all the funds, right?
Mayor, that is one thing that we're going to reevaluate. I called our investment advisor actually yesterday evening and spoke with her extensively. She doesn't think that there will be a large downward impact on what we've proposed, but she is going to look at the numbers again, and if we do need to make any changes, they'll be included in the proposed budget, but I don't expect it to be a big impact on any one fund.
Okay. Billy or Lane, do you have questions? I see Billy does.
Yes, I had the same question Lucy did about the interest. Is that all the way through, Tina, that the interest that's shown on these sheets
Yes,
is
ma'am.
fund balance
Yes.
interest? So
Yeah,
I don't
so
ask that
it's-
question every time.
Yes, ma'am. It's we have an investment advisor that invests our funds for us in accordance with the Public Funds Investment Act. And so our money is earning interest. And so how we allocate that interest income, because it's all in a combined fund, is through whatever is in that related funds fund balance.
And then other, Shane, includes what?
In the other end of it includes.
Do you want me to read them off, Shane?
Sure.
I have a list of them.
But you can.
Has leases, contract fees, liquidated damage, and interest is what I have included
So
there.
hauling permits and
Yeah, the
things
hauling
like that.
permits, things like that are also included in the other as well too, so.
Liquidated damages?
If liquidated damages are a term within the contract, if we have, if the city basically is injured due to the fault of Republic through a notice of violation, whether it's at the landfill or some other issue, then the city is reimbursed for those damages. And so that's what a liquidated damages are within that line item.
All right, so any further questions? Yes, Tom?
Shane, do we charge like TDS and ASU? Do they pay the similar commercial rate as everybody else pays, or do they have a special rate?
No, there's no special rate. What they do is they have to, through their permit, they pay everything across the scales just like everybody else does. But they also, to use our streets and to use our landfill, they have to have a permit that they get through the city as well too, to use our streets and that. And then there's a nominal yearly fee, and then they also pay a percentage of their profit, so.
Harry or Tom, any questions? I can't see your face there, Tommy. Okay, with that, let's move on to the expenditures. So personnel's basically flat, and operations and maintenance and capital. You want to talk through the capital line item as it's the large increase?
The capital, we've been in, we don't have a lot of capital. Most of the time, the capital here is when we're replacing pickups and things like that for the guys that are driving around town, taking care of the enforcement issues and some of those issues. But what we've been doing is helping with since we've purchased the new annex, we've been helping with some of the expenditures out of this fund with the annex, with the control, the air conditioner controller system, replacing some doors, those type things. We've been trying to help with that as well too, from that side of things. Also, the other day, we brought to council the brush truck for the storm debris cleanup and all of that. We also paid for that out of this account. And moving into next year, looking at purchasing an emergency operations trailer for the city as well too. So out of this account.
How does the using money out of this account for the annex building, how do we relate the solid waste fund to funding building issues?
We're a tenant in that building, so we feel that we need to, as a tenant within that building, we need to do our share to help in the upkeep of that building.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, Lucy?
Hey, Shane, did we ever sell the Benedetti machine?
Yes, ma'am. We have a contract right now that is actually being executed for the repurchase and the resale of all that. So it's actually being executed right now.
Thank you.
Billy, did you have a question?
Yes. Shane, was there some discussion about purchasing additional equipment for road reconstruction? And where does that show? Is it in capital?
It's not. It won't be in the solid waste fund.
Billy,
that'll be through the general fund when we get into the general fund.
And that's
portion
with
of it.
additional sales tax receipts is where we were discussing potential new equipment to do mill and overlay and use the funds from the Benedetti as well so that we could move forward. But that's out of the infrastructure that we've talked about being used and addressed with the additional sales tax revenue.
So when we get the reimbursement from the Benedetti, it's going to go into the general fund?
It's going to go back into the fund from which it came, which was a capital fund that was established with the bond funding. It'll go back into those funds, which can at that point be used to purchase other equipment to be used for that purpose.
That would be a budget amendment that we would go through, and they would bring to council for approval. So that's how we could do it. All right. Do I have any other questions for Shane on this solid waste fund? With none, we thank you, Shane.
Mm-hmm.
So we will now go into the stormwater fund. Is that correct? Is that next?
That is correct.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, so Shane, let's talk about, this fund is relatively flat in all areas, but talk about this other on the $60,000 down.
On the.
I think that's the auction items.
That was the auction proceeds, correct. We had, looking at it this past year, we had actually double booked the auction items in 2 different locations. We did, in the revenue side of things, we basically double booked it. And
Shane,
in 2 different.
Could
yeah.
we clarify, you may have budgeted it in 2 locations?
Correct.
But we only booked those things one time?
I'm not an accountant or a
It'll come back
financial
to
officer.
haunt ya.
Nobody was gonna say anything.
That's right. But Michael does. But we
My hands were
basically, yeah. I'm the guy that likes to run the equipment, not the guy that does the budget, so. But we actually, we budgeted in two different locations and two different line items.
We is a good word, isn't it?
Yes, it is, it is. We budgeted it in two different line items, so how's that? Is that better, Michael? You like that a lot better? Okay. So, as we did that, however, we were able to, we actually had a really good year this year in our auction, and so we were actually able to get really close to that revenue anyway, even though that we did budget it in two different line items or two different places, so.
All right, does anyone,
But we did reduce it because we believe as we go into next year, although we are starting to turn our equipment now that it's reached its lifespan, end of its lifespan, that we believe that 60,000 is a very good number for us to look at as we move forward, so.
do we, I know we talk about the lifespan of a vehicle, or do we continue to use them until the blue book, if you will, I guess there's a blue book on this kind of equipment, right?
For every piece of equipment, there are general lifespans for each type of equipment that we have. Some are very short, some are long, and it's based on and how we do it. It's based on hours of use, and then we also not only hours of use and what age it is, but we also look at how much it's costing us in the maintenance side of it. When we start getting our maintenance dollars up there for repairs and things like that are starting to really start getting expensive year after year on a piece of machine, even though it may not have met the age requirement or the hour requirement on it, mileage requirement on it, we will start looking at replacing that just due to its specific cost.
I should be very clear, the blue book, not the blue book.
Yes.
Yes, Harry?
I think if we go back about 5 years ago, previous council, they approved some software that allows us to make some determinations on the life of these vehicles based on what you just said, Shane, maintenance cost, general lifespan according to Blue Book or whatever the case may be. And I think we've seen that particular purchase at the time of that software has paid off for us in having less cost on these maintenance of these items. So I appreciate that. But that, just to remind the public that was a purchase that was kind of vetted quite a bit before all of us were on council, but very good for the entire city.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions on, yes, Billy?
Oh, you're still on revenues?
Yes.
I have, okay.
Okay,
I'll
so
wait.
then I'm going to let you lead off on the question on expenses.
All right, thank you. And this may be a Tina question, I'm never sure. But if I look in the Blue Book, under our current budget, it says 2.6 plus $1 million. If I look at fiscal year 19, it says the original budget for, for capital is a little over $1 million. And then for 20, we're proposing a budget of $713,000. So my question is, what's the fluctuation about? It seems like it's up and then it's down and then it's down some more.
So again, that's grouping. You would combine the capital line and the contingencies line, and that would equal the $1,051,000 that you're seeing on your sheet in front of you. So those two lines are combined, capital and contingency from your Blue Book. So does that make sense?
So that
Oh,
would be
okay.
on the budget, the current budget, the 344,523 and the 2,632,702, those two line items? 'Cause those are
Yes,
the
ma'am. Capital and contingencies, yes.
Okay, say that again, Mayor. I didn't quite get.
Okay, so what we are combining, wait a minute, I have to get it's the 2,632,702 and the 84,361.
For current budget, yes.
For current budget, I said 344,523 because my eyes were not reading straight across. They went up, and I
Okay,
picked up the wrong line.
Okay.
So it's the 2,632,702 and the 84,361, which would give you the 2,716,000 basically.
Okay. Does that make sense at those two lines? Okay. And then what was your next question? Did you have another question after that?
No, that was.
Okay.
I just wondered, what the difference was.
Yeah, well, on these sheets, we don't have as much space, so we sometimes have to group them.
Okay.
So
just do that to confuse me.
Thank you for clarifying. No, I don't.
All right,
Thank
so
you.
the capital is down the 380,000 for this year because,
Last year, when, some of the capital funding there is for larger projects, the Avenue P project specifically within the stormwater fund as well too. But also, last year, when we went through the budget season last year, we actually provided a budget that was expense over revenue, so we could actually start pulling up our fund balance for our equipment replacement within that fund.
so that in 2018-19, that 336,991 actually went to fund balance? It took away from
It came out of
fund
fund
balance.
balance.
Took away from
It
fund
took
balance.
away from fund balance, so we could actually start our
But
equipment
they
replacement
had built up
program.
that fund balance intentionally for that purpose to begin to replace capital at some point in time.
So we won't be pulling from this budget, from the fund balance to fund any new capital.
Not going through the budget cycle. After we did it last year, we found that we believe that it's going to be better for us to actually bring a budget amendment after the budget is set on a balanced budget, to actually bring a budget amendment back to council after this budget's been passed, to actually at that point do the capital replacement at that point, to start the replacement of the equipment at that point after we
So,
passed a balanced
but you
budget.
have, then my assumption is that you have a list of items that are going to need to be purchased that are not
Correct.
currently budgeted?
Correct.
And
We have it sitting aside in the fund balance.
Okay,
Ready
so-
to be spent. It's sitting there. We know that we have the money there.
So
but
you'll
we're-
bring it back to
We're going to
council.
bring it back to council after we pass this original budget.
But the
Correct.
funds are already existing.
They
so
exist, correct.
we won't be doing a negative impact
No,
to
no. They were
the
they
fund
were
balance or the budget.
correct. They were,
Well-
those funds were placed in the fund balance specifically for
Okay.
equipment replacement.
All right,
What
thank
he's
you.
talking about, Mayor, what he's talking about is a draw on that fund balance.
No, I get that.
Okay.
My point is it's planned for already in the fund balance. We know it'll bring it down, but that was a strategic plan to do so.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, do I have any further questions? Yes, Billy?
Shane, I know you just said this, but I didn't quite catch it all. So why are we doing it that way, so that we have to have a budget amendment to it rather than putting it, in the budget, so we don't have to do the amendment?
Because fund balance decisions are made by council.
And I believe from finance's
From
standpoint.
the finance
it's
side, it's a
cleaner.
lot cleaner to do it that way.
But as long as we talk through that as we're reviewing the budget, so we don't get into October and all of a sudden have these conversations and go, why didn't we discuss that during the budget session? We're going to talk about them now and understand that it will come up. It's there in the budget and fund balance for our decision to approve or not approve that money that has been designated for capital improvements. Correct? All right. With that, any further questions on this Stormwater Enterprise Fund? With no further questions, we will move on to the next one. And I believe it's the Airport Operating Fund. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. The primary revenue source for the airport fund is lease income, followed by concessions. The decline in revenue and expenditures is due to more conservative budgeting, which is more in line with what we've actually been seeing in prior years.
Well, let's go ahead and have Jeremy come up. You're ready to go.
Morning, Mayor.
Good morning. How are you
Council.
today?
Good, thank you.
Good. You want to talk through the planning down of leases, rentals, concessions, and advertising, so we better understand those numbers?
Certainly, yeah. Leases, the biggest reason why we have a decrease in our leases and rentals is Eagle Aviation. They store all those aircraft out on the ramp. We've always projected to have 15 to 20 aircraft. Over the last couple of years, we've only had 6 based aircraft out there. So we don't know the health of that program, if they're going to bring more, if they're going to take them away. So we just based it off the 6 aircraft that we've seen.
Okay.
That's the biggest decrease in that. Concessions, we went off the minimum for the rental cars, which is $2,000 per month per rental car agency. We usually collect a little bit more than that, but we wanted to be conservative and make sure we had a balanced budget.
What about vending machines? Where does that money come in?
Vending machines, we're doing well on vending machines. We moved the vending machines upstairs in the sterile area, in the secured area. Yeah, so we're 200% over what we did last year, I think, just by moving it up there. So
What line is that in?
That is in the same line with concessions.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah.
yep, and concessions, that includes our fuel flowage, vending, rental cars. It's a really wide spectrum of our vending.
How are fuel sales right now?
Fuel sales are up. Yep, fuel sales, usually we're pretty even on fuel sales, but we're up just slightly this year.
Okay, and then the big negative is in advertising.
Advertising, that's just historical. We've never cleared more than 10,000 a year. We've budgeted 30, but we've never cleared more than 10, and I can't answer that, but, so we just went with,
So historic number.
yep.
Okay. And, okay, so I'm going to see if other council members have questions for you, Jeremy. Billy, Lane, Lucy, Harry, Tommy. That's clean. Okay, so let's move down to expenses. Personnel is down, and capital, let's see, no, operations and maintenance is down. Good.
Yes.
Positive questions on those two line items from anyone? Lane? Lucy? Billy shook her head no. Harry? Tommy? With none, you're off the hook.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I could.
Yes, sir.
We got one other thing. We don't need to let him off the hook that easy, but they did a few weeks ago, they did a kind of a special little blitz on the curbs on that road going in, and they made it look much better. Their maintenance crew put in lots of extra hours in the heat, and they've already had several comments from tenants about how much better it looks, and so big thanks to that crew for that extra effort to make the airport look better.
You know, it's interesting, and I asked Daniel about this, but a couple weeks ago, Senator Cornyn, there was a big announcement on the radio from Senator Cornyn acknowledging that the city of the Mathis Field had received a $1.1 million federal aviation grant. But I understand that was the grant we received several months ago, or maybe up to a year ago. It's not something that was just newly received, although that it appeared that way because it came across the radio that way. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Just to be sure we didn't get another $1.1 million.
It's
Just
coming.
checking, thought maybe, yeah, overnight we could have got it. I was like, Daniel, I didn't realize we'd applied for another $1.1 million. Yeah.
And I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you're busy, but we are trying to work on the curbside appeal, and the FAA released the $2 million in PFC funds to reconstruct the entrance road and to help rehab the parking lot, so.
Never
hopefully
worry
over the
about
next-
taking up our time.
Okay.
We're here to learn, and we're here to let you share with us issues and positive comments.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
thank you. Thank goodness that's not my
That's the
phone.
mayor's phone.
It is not mine, or right here.
It's the city phone.
Well, that's no excuse. You're supposed to turn them all off.
It's the city's fault again.
It's an excuse, don't be calling.
I didn't know mine had a ringer. Okay, with that, we have now moved out of the airport operating fund, and we will now go into, is it the Fort Concho Fund?
State office.
State office.
Oh, state
building
office.
fund. And so the primary revenue source for the state office building continues to be rental income. And another thing of note on this fund is that as we approach the final payments on the bonds that were issued to build the facilities, we have plans in place for addressing some capital needs both there and at the fort. And the other line in revenue includes capital reimbursement and interest income.
All right, so on the state office building, one of the bonds has expired, another one expires in what year, 2021? And another one in 2023, so those are the two outstanding. And
There's only one actual bond outstanding. In 2021, though, the debt service payment does decrease substantially. It's almost half of what it is currently. And then in 2023, yes, ma'am, you're correct, that is when the final payment will be made.
so the one that has already expired frees up how much money?
It freed up, it expired in, or was paid off in 2018, and it freed up just over $300,000, which was budgeted in the state office building's capital account.
Although we don't see it here, so does that mean it's in a fund balance? Where would that money be located?
It's in O&M. There is a
So
separate
there's
line.
300,000 out of the fiscal 19 budget of 976,628. There's 300,000 of that that's in that fund. That is what? Is that what you're saying? Because that's O&M.
Yeah, in the blue book, it's actually in a separate line item, and there's a budget of original budget of $315,000. And in FY20, they've included a budget for that in the amount of $340,000.
So, and I don't see it in this blue book, but I'm just looking real quick.
It's in your blue book on page 28, towards the bottom.
That's where I'm at. Oh, say at the bottom, the 389,657, or the 315,437?
Yes, ma'am.
315,437. Okay, so I'm assuming that that money is something that we'll talk about when we get to the Fort Concho Fund?
Sure, it can be used. I know that there are needs at the state office building as well as the fort, and I'll let Carl speak to what those needs are.
Right, there's some upcoming projects for redoing some of the stucco on the exterior, doing some painting, replacing some of the carpet. Also,
Where? Of the state office building?
yes, ma'am, and replacement of some HVAC systems, some of which may have to be done next year.
So those dollars will be available for those type of maintenance items as well as potential ones at the fort as well.
All right, so on the $1 million fiscal 20 budget, operations and maintenance, go through that more specifically then.
Why there's an increase?
Well, what makes up the 1,987,000 in this budget of operations and maintenance?
Bob's going to address that.
Is Bob over the state office buildings fund? Okay, just to be clear.
Mayor, Council, good morning. The operations and maintenance section of the state office fund includes all the utilities and just all of the expenses to run the thing.
It includes your, I'm sorry.
And, I'm sorry.
I was going to help you out a little bit. 340 of it is that capital
Yes.
account that I had mentioned earlier. 112,000 of it is your rent that you.
The allocation
There.
that goes to the fort.
Yes.
That's correct. I
So
think that-
112,000 of the operations and maintenance budget goes to the fort?
Actually, it's divided, this gets kind of convoluted, so
Yeah.
bear with me, but the State Office Fund 201 is divided into two subsections, the 1908 and the 1909. The 1908 is the Chase Building, that's the larger building on Oak Street, 100,000 square feet. The 1909 is the Workforce Building on Flipper Street, 20,000 square feet. So the fund covers both of them, but the expenses are broken down in some cases between those two facilities. Each of those facilities has an allocation to the fort for the fort's operations, prorated basically on the size of each building. The best way to understand the fund, excuse me, and how the allocation goes is, as was mentioned earlier, the revenue over expenses starting in fiscal 20 and going the next 5 years based on the reduction and the elimination of the debt service will free up somewhere in the neighborhood of several $100,000 per fiscal year. And I submitted to the Budget Committee this year and last year a plan whereby 50% of that excess revenue would be allocated to the state building for its needs, 35% to the fort for its needs, and then 15% to maintain the fund balance at a reasonable rate. There are a lot of variables here, unfortunately. One of the variables is the tenant load. We have a full load at the moment in both buildings, but agencies come and go, and we're looking at a very slight loss of one agency in the next month or two, but we're hoping to replace that with the expansion of another agency. So there's a little bit of variance in there. The last issue is the extent of the lease. We were hoping for a 10-year lease. That's what we've had the last two 10-year sessions. State was only willing to go for 5. We agreed with 5. We assume they'll want to re-up in another 5 years, but we can only logistically and reasonably plan out this capital plan for the next 5 years. The good news on both buildings, the state buildings, is they both have pretty good roofs. We spent heavily to replace the roof on the Chase building about 8 to 10 years ago, and the roof on the workforce is in good shape. The HVACs seem to be holding together nicely. We may be able to push off the repairs or replacements at the Chase building to fiscal 20. You probably get better rates too if you do it in the off-season. Most of the capital issues at the Chase building right now are cosmetic issues, walls, stucco, carpet, things that we need to do when agencies change or things that we are required to do due to the lease.
Okay, so now that we're all totally confused, we'll start asking questions.
Mayor, if I may,
Yes,
I do
you
have
will.
some more information for you on what is included in that O&M line. There's 340 there for the capital that we discussed, 315 total for both buildings for rents, about 150,000 for utilities, about $150,000 for that debt service payment, $60,000 for maintenance, and $130,000 for professional services. Bob, is that your janitorial?
It's the cleaning.
Yeah.
That's correct.
That's the bulk of what would be included in that amount.
And there are a lot of line items in there that are general light maintenance related. It's a big building and has a lot of needs.
Go ahead, Lucy, I
Second
hear.
question, real quick. Where did you say, what's the address for the Chase building?
The Chase building is legally located at 622 South Oaks. The workforce is at 100-something Flipper Street. Flipper at Wall Street,
Right next to the stables.
right next to the stables.
All right, so the rental income is based off of the lease agreements we have with the government agencies.
That's
For
correct.
the Chase building, the workforce building.
Set by the lease with a modest escalator per year. There's also light interest there. The 50,000 you see on the other, actually 50,000 of the 54,501 and 50 of the 65,786, that represents a pass-through account. Sometimes the agencies need something done to improve their suite. They're forbidden by state law to pay for it directly. So we get an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, commission it, we do it, they pay us back, revenue neutral. And it's actually helped over the years. Many of the agencies now have very secure lobbies, which they didn't have 20 years ago, and unfortunately, it's different now.
Okay.
Thank you. That was my question. He read my mind as we looked here.
That is both good and may not happen again.
All right, with that, do I have questions from council on the state office building?
One on your
One,
HVAC.
Lane, go ahead.
You spoke about having some foreseen replacements, repairs. of
Yes.
HVAC. Is that
I
gonna
think
be
we
in the
can
next
possibly
year, or-
push that off.
We having
Dwayne,
problems with them now to,
Not many. I mean, the systems are at.
106 degrees or 16 days of over 100 degrees, they
If
tend to
they-
wear them out a little bit more.
If they haven't busted now, they will get through the summer. But you are correct. It's something we've been thinking seriously about for years, but we never had the money to do anything. Now we do. Dwayne Hoffman, the building superintendent, is working on a series of quotes on that. Given that you may get better attention in the off-season, I would recommend, unless something comes up, we push that off to fiscal 20.
Okay? Do I have any further questions for Bob on the state office building? With none there,
Ma'am,
yes,
I have
I'm sorry,
one
Billy.
other- This was something you mentioned. And Bob, it's in the account 1999 in the
Yes.
blue book for capital, for 315,000. Under the current budget, what is that included in on this sheet that I have here?
It's in the
That's in your
operations.
O&M. That's what she went through a minute ago, Billy, when
Okay,
she went
okay.
the 315, the 340, the 150, the 150, the 60, and the 130, which added up to the 1,987,000.
987, okay.
If
correct.
you
all right.
add those,
Okay.
it would
Money
equal
is
that.
there, it's just in accounting and on the different sheets, it's accounted for on different line items, but it is there.
In this, in the budget that we're proposing, the amount has actually increased to 340,000.
We can do a lot of good with that.
Okay, so now with that, we will move into the Fort Concho Fund, is that correct?
So a little background on the Fort Concho Fund. Fort Concho operations are funded through tax dollars, the state office building support, and program income. Fort Concho Fund is working on implementing a capital plan for facility improvements, and as well as making the fund more self-sufficient. And I'll let Carl elaborate a little bit more on that in a moment, but the other line I just want to let you know includes donations, living history, special projects, and interest income.
Let's start off with, before we start going through the budget, we have a memo from Mr. Torres dated July 26, 2019, on Fort Concho improvements. And this memo indicates that we have a need for $553,220 in total, based off of the estimates for desperately needed work on Fort Concho. So as we go through this one, can you tell me in this, particularly this fund, where that money's going to come from, or where we get that money to pay for this $553,220 that needs to be done ASAP?
So the plan that the staff put together, well, years ago, in trying to, we rely on funds that Bob brings in, or general fund support, or in this case, dollars that you see coming off from the state office complex. As we've looked at that, those are the dollars that are coming up that free up for us to be used. Other than that, we have to rely upon either hot dollars that are allocated for things such as this, or council allocations such as you did last year. So last year, basically, we ended up with about $234,000. We took the money that council allocated, which was about $161,000. We were able to use some additional state office complex dollars for maintenance to put into that. Al's figures of the $500,000 really only include the windows and the columns and such. So the fascia, some of the other stuff that needs to be done in addition to that. So 500 is, in my opinion, the minimal. That there's some other stuff, and Al has a very thorough report where they went through each building. It's itemized by building. It shows how much, what needs to be done, and how we do that. So if we were able to get and utilize the amount of dollars that we spent last year, then we could have all this finished within about 2 or 3 more years, completed out. So right now,
Some of these can't wait for 2 or 3 years.
well,
They're bad.
right now, those are under contract, the ones that we have, and I'll let Al speak a little bit to that topic. So our ways to do that is to contract it out or do it in-house. So we have guys that work on columns. We have problems filling those positions right now. So as much as we may try, we're limited on that. Al can speak to you about the problems we had even getting contractors to bid on these projects. So those are the challenges we face. No matter how much money we throw at it, we still have to meet those. Now, they've done a good job. Those are in the process now. And if we allocate dollars for it, then we can turn around and do this again on the next set of buildings and can do it again that following. Or we can, if we want to look at a larger sum of money, things that we've done in the past are we allow the city to front some of those dollars from your general fund reserve, and then the state office complex fund pays back the city. So those are ways to, if you want to allocate it all up front, and we are able to do one huge project, sort of like the roofs, you know, it was one huge project, then we may be able to pull in a bigger bidder who is willing to come in and do that job because it's a bigger project. But to answer your question, the sources, state office complex, hot dollars, general fund. But there are ways to work that where you front the money and then let the state office complex fund pay back the general fund.
Okay, Al, you want to come forward?
Good morning, Mayor, Council.
Good morning.
So everything Rick said is correct. Basically, when you gave us some funds this past year, our first step was to come in and do an inventory first. Between Bob and I, and his staff, we inventoried everything, the entire complex, all 19 buildings, how many columns, how many windows, which windows need replacement, which windows need repair, that kind of stuff. Once we had an inventory, then we went back and worked with the contractor to look at each building and get a price on what it's going to take to get each building fixed, just the exterior, just maintenance-wise, just for the appearance. The number we came up with, $553,000, that's the number that's in there. However, like Rick said, that was a little misleading because they did not include fascia and trim, which is the boards around the edge of the roof, which in a lot of these buildings do need to be replaced. So that's probably roughly 15% on top of that.
So that's another 120,000.
Correct. So if we look at, then our next step was to look at all that and come back and say, well, we had $230,000 roughly. What can we do with that to get the most bang for our buck? So we looked at the buildings that we could start with, and we've got 4 buildings that we're doing with that money, and most of that $200,000 is going to go towards these 4 buildings, and that's OQ6, OQ8, the hospital, and the chapel building. And on top of that, we're going to redo the cupolas on Barracks 1 and 2 and Barracks 5 and 6. They're in pretty bad shape. The rest of those funds, Bob is handling in-house. They are buying materials. They are going to do the columns on Barracks 1 and 2 and 5 and 6. They've already started that. They've got quite a few, some columns replaced, but a lot of it you don't see because they're doing them off-site, building the columns ahead of time, and then they're going to go out there and start putting them in. So we've got a good head start on everything, but again, that's only 4 or 5 buildings for the 19.
So with all the information that you've just presented in terms of dollars and what you currently have money to do, the net negative needs in money is?
Like Rick
So
said,
you have 553
we really-
plus 120, so that's 675,000.
Really, I think that Tina, correct me, Tina, if I'm incorrect, but basically in the fund now, you say we have, and we might want to keep some in there, but there's around 300.
So budgeted in state office building fund, 340,000 in next year's budget, in the proposed budget, I should clarify. And in the current year budget, so they had that beginning capital expenditure budget of $315,000. They've used about 21,000 of that year to date, and then as well, council did authorize the use of 125,000 of that for the roofs at Fort Concho. So they do have a remaining budget there that could be available of about
Right, so for-
170,000.
For next year to do a round like this, we could be set again to do that, to fund that and do it again.
Once
So
again,
what-
clarify the bottom line number. With all that said, with the 315,000, 340,000, the 161,000,
Can I,
what is the
So Al, you have
number?
the 553, and then you're saying at least another 15%, so another, what'd you say, 120?
Well, that's
or something?
675,000. If you take the 553, add 15%, you're 675. If you take the 340 that's already in there, that leaves 335. Then you mentioned 315,
Well-
20 of that been gone, so that's 290 of the
145 is
290.
gone.
So
I would-
290 minus 335 is $45,000 or $50,000.
may I clarify something?
Yeah.
Al, is any of the money that was already allocated, the $236,000, will that bring down the 553 at all? Does any of that go towards the 553 or the 675 with the additional 15%?
Now I'm confused.
That's why we need to know
Right.
what is the dollar amount, non-funded dollar amount to do the immediate needs of all of this?
This may take some huddling between Carl, Al, and myself. The 4 projects that we have in process that he mentioned, I'm not sure how they relate to the 550. I don't think they were columns, correct?
The 550 says the estimate included columns and windows only and was given to us as 553,220.
Let me see if I can answer that. I show that basically the estimate of 553, then we need to add additional for that, which comes out about 728. So, did I do that right?
120 and
So-
5 is 60, so 180, add 180 to 553. So 553 and 180 is 733, rounded off to 735,000.
So I had 728, so 730. And then we currently have allocated, this 234,000 that is being used, which leaves about 500,000, in my opinion, that is going to need to be allocated to get us where we need to be as far as the
Correct.
remainder of the work.
What we had talked about was the $234,000 that we had this year. We said if we could get that same amount next year and the year after that, we could have this project done in
Can't wait for 3 years,
phases.
yeah, but it
But what
can't
I'm
wait.
hearing is that you don't
Yeah.
want to wait 3 years.
Well, you won't have a single column left. You will have rotted wood around all of the windows. And so the expense 2 years down the road or
gonna
3
be
years
greater.
down the road is going to triple. So, I mean, the reality is we can push it down as long and far as you want, but it just gets more expensive, and that's what we're facing today.
So the-
The issue is you need about $500,000.
Right.
Now, keep in mind that is assuming that the work is going to be done cheaper because Bob's staff is going to be able to do a part of those columns, which makes it cheaper. If we want to contract out the entire thing, then it's going to be more expensive than this. So Tina just told us, I think we have maybe around, I keep saying 300,000.
340 or the 315?
So in the remaining in the fiscal year 19 budget should be about $170,000 in the state office building funds capital account. And in the proposed budget for 2020, we're including an amount of $340,000, which would yield just over 500, it's about
So that would be
510,000.
410,000, so you'd have
Tina?
about 100,000, 90 to 100,000 left to be funded.
That's 500 and,
No, well,
170 plus 340.
Tina, will you confirm
170 and 340
you're not
is 510, right?
you're not reallocating those dollars already allocated that he's
That's my
using right
concern,
now?
is we're duplicating we're using the numbers in 2 different areas is my concern.
234 that he has right now that he's already using on projects or on his column rebuild, we're not looking at that.
Let's do this. Let's start with the
No,
high
because I am
number.
looking at
What
the
is
state office
total
building fund,
cost?
and that would be in the Fort Concho fund.
Okay, let's start with the total big number. What's the total expense
Right.
of these really necessary, immediate
Right, yeah.
needs of wood rot? What's the number?
Including the amount they're doing right now or excluding that?
The total amount, and then we'll go through where the funds come through, Rick, so if they're using 230, but let's start with the expense line first. What's the total need?
So the 553 plus 180 is $733,000.
Right.
They're saying they had 236,000 of that allocated in a prior year.
Mayor, can we ask
Yes.
where that came from?
It's
That
money that we,
236,000?
yeah, go ahead.
It was allocated through, I believe it was surplus sales tax
It
revenue
was.
from last year.
When we
And-
did that in
And some
September,
additional.
October,
Really,
we
it also
allocated, it
came
was
from.
161.
A portion of it came from state office complex. The bulk of it came from sales tax allocation that y'all did.
So
That
we-
sales tax was the 161, the 161,000 that's in here somewhere.
Correct.
161, 170.
Okay, but hold on before you
Okay.
go there. So we're using these 2 funds interchangeably where we can find something? The state office fund and the Fort Concho fund?
Because, yes, we are.
Okay.
We are, Bob oversees both,
Uh-huh.
and the debt service was paid for from what fund?
From the state office building fund.
Okay, so the lease is responsible there, the lease that has already expired, future lease payments, and are where we're coming up with some of the money that we
Now,
utilize.
this would be budgeted in the state office building fund, and it would require a budget amendment to come to the city council to move it from the state office building fund into Fort Concho's fund if we did choose to use it for the capital needs there.
And how much is that, Tina? How
So
much?
in the current, so we started out with the 733. They have the 236 that was previously allocated. There is currently about $170,000 in the current year capital budget remaining
Which fund?
in the state office building fund. And then in next year's proposed budget, there is $340,000 proposed in that capital account.
So if you add 236, 340, and 170, you come up with $746,000, which if you use that pays for the $733,000 problem.
If I may jump in for a moment.
No, because I don't want anybody to be confused here. I want it to be really straightforward based off of what we just said. Yes, you may. But do not mess with these numbers, because we've just gone through.
Actually, and you might want to let Tina and them answer that question first before we get into other,
What is the question?
if those dollar amounts the mayor's stated.
Yes,
are
if the
correct.
Just gave
council,
them to me.
if the council chose
Make
to
sure they're
use,
correct.
yes, if the council chose to use those capital accounts for that purpose, the money would be there. No.
That was my question.
What is the question?
The state office fund that seems to be the source for fixing the Fort Ills also needs to be preserved to fix the state building's ills. And if you allocate all of the revenue over expenses for fiscal '20 or any future year,
We're only
that-
talking 20.
well, that still leaves the state office building without a capital line item.
All right, but the capital line item, we just went through the state office building fund, right? And on that state office fund, building fund, the dollars that are set aside, Lane asked the question about the needs, air conditioners. We said they weren't needed in this current budget.
In fiscal
that they
'19,
could go through the next budget cycle, right?
correct?
So that would be the 21 budget,
No, I think
the
what
20
Bob-
budget.
I'm sorry, I was referring to '19 as the existing and '20 as the future.
Okay, so in the 19 budget, we don't need to spend it. In the 20 budget, you think we will need to spend it. And those dollar projections would be what, based off of the budget we just went through?
I don't know exactly what the air conditioning needs would be until we see.
What does the budget show?
We don't have that included yet in the proposed budget, Mayor.
So in the state office building fund.
It
that
would
we
have just been
went
paid,
over,
it would have been paid from that $340,000 capital account if the need arises in the next fiscal year. So
Okay,
that's, I
so
think
the-
that's what Carl and Bob are getting at, is that if we do max out the use of the capital accounts in the state office building, then it leaves nothing left for other capital needs at the state office building. I would point out, however, that there is a pretty healthy fund balance in that fund as well, and so if we did need to come back to council and ask to use that, that could be a potential possibility.
Correct.
Okay, so in the state office building fund, which is planned on this 20 budget for $1 million, $1,987,000, right? Of that, we went through, and there was a 315, which we just talked about, the 340, the $150,000 for utilities, $150,000 for
Debt
debt,
service,
$60,000 for
maintenance.
maintenance, and so the 60,000 for maintenance doesn't include air conditioners. It doesn't include carpets.
That's correct.
It does.
Does
Does
not.
not.
Does not. And then there's 130,000 for professional services.
That's the cleaning.
Janitorial services, yes.
So that's in that $1 million. So the 315 and the 340 in this $1 million is the money that we're now talking about pushing over towards the Fort Concho Fund?
The 315 is actually rents that are paid by the state office building to the fort. Is that correct, Bob?
Yes,
Yes.
all of the money in the state
And the
office
340
fund
is the capital.
I'm sorry?
And the 340 would be the capital
That
that we
is
have
correct.
proposed.
It's revenue over expenses for that fiscal year.
Where are these numbers y'all keep throwing out there? I'm
Okay.
looking at the state office building in the blue book on page 28, and I see the 315, 349. Is that one of the numbers?
Yes, ma'am.
It is not one of the numbers the
Well,
mayor just listed.
it is in this
It's
operating budget.
In the current budget,
In the
yes.
current budget.
It correlates
in
to
the
the
current
340 in next year.
Is
So
the 20 budget or the 19?
it's 315 in the 19 budget and 340 in the 20 budget for capital. The numbers that the mayor just listed were what she had asked were included in the total $1 million budget for the state office buildings operation and maintenance.
1.3 million?
Billy, if you go back to this book, the blue book.
That's where
And
I
you
am.
go down to the capital line.
Uh-huh.
And it's 315,437.
Right, I see
Okay,
that.
that's the 315.
Right, okay.
Okay. Now, the 340,
Is the 2020 proposed amount for that same account.
so instead of being 315, the budget is proposed at 340, so it just went up by $25,000. But it's
Okay.
the one and the same.
And so it includes all of these same, this breakout. It's the same breakout. The 315 for the 340, so that it's professional services, utilities, maintenance,
Rent,
rent,
debt,
and
perfect.
et cetera, et cetera. All right. So I understand the 315 and the 340. Where does the 170 come from?
That is what would be remaining in the capital account for the current year. You can see on your blue book that they've spent $21,000 out of their capital account. And then council did approve an additional $125,000 of that for the roofs at Fort Concho. And so what would be remaining after that is approximately $170,000.
Where it's showing under budget right now, 294,000?
Right, you'd have to
Okay,
subtract the
all right,
125
okay.
for the roofs, and then what was remaining would be approximately 170,000.
Oh, okay.
Mayor, if I may, what I.
Is that
would sug-
bloodier? Can you, yeah. Is that messier?
What I would suggest is that if the council's general consensus is you want to try and fund all of these improvements in the upcoming year, where we might be able to bid out a larger contract, trying to draw in a bigger, y'all allow us to develop that plan, to fund that, plus also taking into account any projections that we see Bob may need at the state office complex, and how we can do that out of these dollars, and if that would require us then to dip into the fund balance, and you would know approximately what that would be, and we can bring that back at an upcoming budget hearing.
I think we have to be very realistic. These needs, as detailed by your memo, are not 2 or 3 years down the road. All you have to do is drive around the fort, look at these pictures, and know that it is immediate, not down the road projects.
We
Because
agree.
it just
The
gets
sooner the
worse and
better.
more expensive.
So if that's y'all's direction, we can move in that.
Well, let me ask you
Yeah.
another question, and that is, right now, on this budget, we show that you get hot money of $50,000 a year.
Correct.
And that hot money covers what?
That is general operating support for the fort.
And that means what? So,
That means it goes into our general operating account. It is not allocated specifically for anything other than the general budget of the fort for maintaining it, interpreting it, providing services, events. It goes in the general account to fund the fort for the year.
so here's the big question. So let's say in the next 6 months, we have found a way to fund the immediate bad situation at the fort that must be taken care of. From that, let's say the roofs get replaced, all of these columns, fascias, windows, et cetera, get done. What is the amount of money it will take on an annual basis to maintain the fort? Because we need to, once done, figure out how we maintain the best preserved fort west of the Mississippi, right?
I have never had that opportunity, and I would look forward to trying. I would have to get some figures back at you. Obviously, it's easier to maintain something that's in good shape than to maintain something that's not. We are constantly playing catch-up. Not proud of it, but that's the way it is. If that's council's pleasure, we can bring back some cost estimates and plans for that.
Is there an open opportunity to look at giving the fort more hotel occupancy money that is specific designated for maintenance going forward?
From hotel occupancy tax to the fort? I would defer to Teresa on that question, but I don't believe there would be a problem with that.
That's not a problem.
Budgetarily, that could be easily done. It can be allocated into a revenue line separately. It could then be reallocated into an expense line separately, tracked left to right, and used only for maintenance and repair. That, if that's agreeable to the legal and financial parties, that could be done. Currently, the hot money we receive is just general operating support to operate us as a tourism operation and thus bring people in.
You know, one of the things that we talk about hot tax funds, you know, for me, it's always about looking at what it costs on a daily basis to operate something. And when you operate and you're open 6 days a week from 10 to 6, 7 days a week, 10 to 6,
9 to 5.
9 to 5. See how little I know. But it's many hours and many days.
Yes.
And so what I feel strongly about is that I don't believe we want to look at transferring more money from the general fund to help secure the fort. So we need to look at other revenue opportunities to help maintain the fort and ensure it's the best preserved fort west of the Mississippi and the number 2 fort selected for the, what was the magazine?
Number 4. Actually.
Number 4 in True
Oh,
West.
number 4, actually, yeah.
Okay.
Which is still pretty good, Mayor.
All right, so general fund can't have more expense. And so the question mark is there support for relooking at the hot money and suggesting that we use $100,000 of hot money in this and designate it for maintenance of the fort?
I think we need to make sure that we are following the state guidelines on hot funds to historic ventures so that we don't get too far out of line. I would remind this council about 6 years ago, the prior council made a decision to not fund $50,000 out of general fund for the fort, but instead use hot dollars at the time, which I think was probably okay. We just got to make sure that we know that those dollars are going to continue to flow to the fort, whatever that number is, as long as it's along the state guidelines.
Teresa has some clarification. I think it was presented at one point that there was a percentage that could go towards historic, but that is for cities of less than 100,000, 120,000 people. That doesn't apply to us,
Yeah, it
correct?
applies to cities above 125,000 people. There's also another provision that limits us to 50% if we did not fund a convention and visitor center or a convention center. Since we do fund both of those things, then we are no longer limited even by that 50% number. So the question is, what number do we have? And as a home rule city, if it doesn't tell us we have to have a certain number, then we're pretty much left on our own to decide what's best.
So it was presented that there was a 15% number, which does not apply to us. So that is not an issue. I just know the longer we postpone necessary maintenance, the more expensive it becomes. And we've got to deal with the issue. So
Good
that's
point.
my
I'm sorry.
perspective.
Mayor, I just want to make sure that we understand something here. So we're suggesting a placeholder at this point, an amount that we can, because we're going to address hot monies in just a little bit as well. So you're looking at some type of a placeholder that will address maintenance and make sure that we can address it right now moving forward.
In my opinion.
Okay.
The beauty of the hot fund, of course, it does go up, and obviously it does go down year to year in the future. If you're proposing this can be tailored to the financial opportunities of each year, and can be, if it's allocated specifically for maintenance, then whatever the number is, it can do a good job. If it's not targeted to personnel or to things that have permanent liabilities, then whether it's 25,000, 50,000, 100,000 per fiscal year, we can spend it and we can make it work.
We need an allocated number from maintenance so that we know that we don't come back to the table and have to address another $700,000, that it's done, the work is done, and then the work is maintained.
Mayor, if I could, Tina, how soon, if you were going to include that sort of mechanism in the original budget, how soon would you need to know what that number is?
We would need to know by the next workshop, which is the
26th or
27th, I think.
August 27th. Is that a question?
It is.
Yes, okay.
My question is, why can't we use some fund balance money for some of this?
They are looking at that. It's what Rick
Yeah,
proposed
in our
a minute
plan,
ago.
what we'll do is look at those dollars that are being freed up, what's there, and then as Bob is talking about and what the mayor is talking about, if you fund all of that maintenance up front, then what we may have to do is fall upon the fund balance in that account to help us out with any state office complex needs. But we'll put that plan together that shows you how you may have to lean on that fund balance or not. But it probably will have to lean on it a little bit.
Okay, because, and the reason I wondered if we could use some of that, because when the mayor throws out a number like $100,000 out of hot tax, I'm saying who's gonna have to give up that $100,000, because there is, a need there.
There is 50, my point is, there's a 50 already. It would just be an additional 50, not an additional 100.
And we'll look
okay.
at,
All
So
right.
it would be a total of 100 with all that 100, the 50 currently that they get, plus 50 that would be designated for maintenance. It would
Maintenance.
just be specifying it, not just laying it out there.
Well, I was just,
that was it.
and I know we're going to discuss hot taxes, but I think that is going to be quite an intense discussion when we start talking about where we're going to get the money from hot tax when we have fund balances sitting here.
we'll look
And
at
that's why I asked that.
that realm as well and how it might affect someone else.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, I was not asking for an additional 100.
No,
but
I
to add
understand
50
that.
just-
And I did think you were
Yeah.
asking for an additional
ma'am.
100, so thank you for that clarification.
Okay, where are we now that we have, all right, so we've talked about the Fort Concho improvements. Al, are you comfortable with the numbers conceptually that we've talked about so that you can work with Rick and Bob to strategize all of that and put together a plan for us?
Yes, ma'am, and I'll right away start working on the numbers for getting it all bid at once, or,
And just to remind council, remember, as he does those numbers, those are estimates. And when we do bids,
We
they
know.
come in one way or the other. So we'll adjust and work with that as we move through it.
Okay, so I think, were there any further questions on the Ford? Okay, if not, then what I'm going to ask is that we take a 10-minute break, and we will come back, and then we will do the hotel occupancy tax fund. And we are now going to go into the hot fund, is that right? All right, so we're now on the hotel occupancy tax fund, and who speaks to this? You.
I will get started speaking on this one. So obviously, the main source of revenue in the hotel, or the only source of, well, there's interest income, but other than that, the main source of revenue is the hotel occupancy tax that is charged to our hoteliers. And in this fund, we are currently proposing a flat budget in the same amount that was budgeted in fiscal year 19 of $2,242,657,000 with an interest income budget of $56,000.
What page is this in the blue book? 40, okay.
So with the expenditures, we have external partners, and then we have transfers out to our other internal funds. So I'm going to go to the next slide that kind of shows how those are broken out, so you can see that more clearly, but we can go back to the other slide too whenever you're ready. So we have a $50,000 budget for the San Angelo Performing Arts Center, $975,625 for the Convention and Visitors Bureau, $112,133 budgeted for the San Angelo Cultural Affairs Council, and that is, of course, 5% of the proposed revenue budget. $37,500 for downtown San Angelo, $50,000 for Fort Concho, $1,008,500 for civic, or $50, pardon me, for civic events, and $50,000 for Texas Bank Sports Complex. These were what was directed by the city council the last time we met and discussed how the allocations would be placed for the hotel occupancy tax. I do want to point out that the amount that has been budgeted or proposed in the budget for the Convention and Visitors Bureau is prorated. There is still 3 months left on their contract at the rate of $865,000, and then their new contract would begin on January 1, and so 9 months at the new amount of $1,012,500 that has been requested and proposed.
Yes, Harry, go ahead.
We've tried, can we come back to that previous
Yes.
slide? We've tried to move away from percentage for years. I'm still confused as to why we got the Cultural Affairs Council at a percentage.
That is
Because they have a
because
contract.
their contract does not expire until the end of our fiscal year 2020, and so we can revisit that during our next budget cycle.
Very good. I want to make sure that we get to that spot, though. I mean, we've moved everybody else off a percentage. We really need to get to the spot where everybody's on an allocated amount.
You know, what I'd like to do is ask for this budget proposal to be changed and add the 50,000 we just talked about from Fort Concho, which would bring the budgeted amount up by 50,000.
So we would increase the revenue budget by the 50,000 as well as the transfer out to Fort Concho by 50,000.
Yes, instead of trying to take it away from somebody, add it into the budget.
Mayor, I do want to point out that we were conservative on our projections for the revenues as well. It's pretty close to flat, really, is what we did this year.
Yes,
So-
ma'am. In budgeting flat for the remainder, well, of course, there's one more month that we haven't accounted for yet in the fiscal year. But budgeting flat, we expect to yield about $2.7 million in this fund, and so we do see that we are having a good year, and we will see a surplus. So I do feel comfortable if we wanted to increase the budget by $50,000.
Okay, that is my request. And I see heads nodding, so, all right, so do I have other questions for Tina from council? Billy?
Okay, Tina, could you go back to the other slide? So it looks like with the HOT Fund, the Convention and Visitors Bureau is the only one that's getting a bump. Am I looking at that correctly? And then Civic Events is the only one that's taking a hit.
Yes.
Look at that. Okay. So could you tell me, my first question is, if Civic Events still had their 48% allocation, what would their number be rather than what it's showing there?
It would be the $1,076,476 that was included in the current year budget because we did propose a flat budget for revenue.
A flat budget, okay, all right. So, and this may take Harry or Michael or somebody to answer this question, but when we went to a flat rate for our line items, and we left the Cultural Affairs Council and the Civic Events Fund at a percentage, why did we leave them at a percentage back when?
We just said that.
No, I'm not,
Oh.
I'm just talking about civic events 48% and cultural affairs 5%. It was my understanding that all of these used to be percentages.
That's correct.
And then
so-
all of them went to a flat rate except those two. So why did we leave those?
If I may, at that point in time, there were actually only 3 parties that were receiving funding from hotel occupancy tax, and that was the Convention and Visitors Bureau, Civic Events, and SACAC, the San Angelo Cultural Affairs Council. And those amounts were 47%, 48%, and 5%. And all of these other partners have come on board after we moved the CVB to a flat contract amount.
The CVB took a major hit 3 years ago, 4 years ago,
When you say took a major hit.
because they no longer were given the 47%, because they used to get 47% of this fund.
Okay.
And they were taken to a flat fee. And so they took a big hit from that year's actual dollar amount because of the 47%. So they used to be like the other two.
Right.
Now, so that's the explanation for that. So,
Okay. So,
If you took a percentage, that 47%, thank you, 47% for the Convention and Visitors Bureau like it was probably 6 or 7 years ago, that number would be greater than the $1,850,000 for the civic events today. It'd be somewhere around $1,500,000.
okay.
$1,050,000, excuse me.
and one of the reasons, there are a couple reasons for having done that at the point in time, was that the CVB have had a difficult time spending the money at the end of the season, meaning if all of a sudden we had a lot of hot tax money, and let's say there was I'll make up the number, so these are not real numbers, but let's say they got 47% of the numbers. So then so they got another 100,000. Well, then you have to hurry up and spend it to keep it. And you would be making decisions that were not necessarily good decisions because you either spent it or you gave it back. So there was this hurry up and spend it, however we can spend it. And so it didn't seem to be a financially sound way to manage the CVB. And they were told then that they could come back and request additional funds along the way, but we were going to take them off of the percentage, give them a flat budget so that they could better project and plan their season.
Okay.
And that's the reason it was done then.
Okay. All right.
So between that and the civic events, you were at 96% of the total dollars for many years.
Well, you know, I was absent from the council meeting when Diana gave her report. One of the things that I may have missed when I watched it on Channel 17, and I'm sure somebody will correct me, but one of the things I missed is it seems like an awful lot of the dollars are spent going to these trade shows where they're getting San Angelo's name out there, but I don't really I didn't hear in that report what the return on that type of investment is. You know, when you go to Canada or Mexico or whatever, you know, and attend these shows so that, you know what's going on in the industry, is there any return on that? So, you know, I went to Mexico and I did this, and as a result of that, so-and-so came to San Angelo and decided to have their convention here, and I put 100 heads in beds.
Right.
That sort of thing. So is there no way, and maybe this is a question for them, is there any way to, you know, to measure the return for investment?
Yes, unfortunately, no one's here from the CVB, but I'm going to try to answer that question for you, and believe me, I'm not the spokesperson, so know that what I say might not be 100% correct. But if you don't go, you will be assured there's no return. You have no ability to get your name out there. We also know that many of the people who look to plan trips or conventions in San Angelo, they do it 2 years out, 18 months out, 12 months out. So you might go this August to a conference. You might not see someone booking here until their 2022 convention because they've already booked this year's convention and probably have already sent out RFQs for next year's. And so it's sort of, if you don't go now, you'll never see a return. And there's no guarantee by going you will be able to, because if we don't have the facilities that they need, then we won't get them. But that's one of the reasons you don't see an immediate return, is because you have to go now for 2 years down the road hoping to get them here, if it's a convention. Now, if it's tour buses or those kinds of things, that would be a different issue. And
we have such a strict measure of accountability for some departments, Mayor.
Yes, ma'am.
Where we hold their feet to the fire
We do.
on, you know, giving us data to reflect, you know, what you did with the money. And I just don't see that same level of accountability. So even if it's 2 years from now, you could say, 2 years ago, I went here, and as a result of that, we now in 2020 got this convention. It
Yes.
just seems like there should be some way to track that. That's all
And
I'm saying.
And I think you're correct in asking the question. And I'm sorry, I can't answer it, and we will get Diane to get us that information.
Okay.
So, but it's also one of the reasons that I talk consistently about and challenge consistently about the heads and beds, because we know that that's what hot tax money is all about. Hot tax money is about making sure that the events that we do, the things we sponsor, put heads in beds. And so I'm always going to be asking, how did you track it? Prove to me that you put a bed and a head in a bed. And so whether it's this, and reviewing this, and maybe we should in fact be talking about the civic events before we talk about the hot tax money, because those dollars are in here as well. But the state basically says hot tax money is heads and beds. And so all of the people that we give money to here need to be producing the paperwork that proves they did what the state requires, and that puts heads in beds.
Right, exactly.
So, but some of it is delayed. And so even for civic events, they might book in January of this year somebody at the river stage that doesn't fall till October, because they have to book these bands down the road. So in your 19 budget, you might not be able to prove that head in bed, because that head in bed falls into the next calendar year. That being said, we still need to be tracking heads and beds. And it just takes a couple of phone calls to kind of figure that out. It's not 100% proof, it's.
Right, and it may not be 100%, but, give
that.
us, some kind of
But we
measure.
need to know that our dollars are producing the end result that we want. So your question's correct.
So I just have one other comment.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor, it looks like CVB is getting $110,000 approximately increase over their budget for this year.
The total, I'm sorry, you weren't finished, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, looks like they're getting $110,000.
That is,
going from 865 to 975, it looks like.
The prorated amount is a $110,000 increase, but the actual contract will be, or what has been requested and proposed is $1,012,500 for each year of the contract. And so that total increase is $147,500
But we
on
very
the contract amount.
Okay, but we very specifically said 1 year only. This is
That's
not.
what I thought.
We
So-
said 1 year only, prove it up, show us that that money bought us something. This isn't a forever after. It was a 1 year, and that's what we said that day, is you can have it for 1 year, Diana. We need to reevaluate it. That does not mean that we're setting your budget at that going forward.
So
So what year is it going to be? 20?
It would be, it
It'll
would
be
be
their calendar year of January 1, 2020 through December 31.
2020, so it would fall into 2 budget cycles.
2 of our budget cycles, yes.
So the reason I was wanting to make sure I was clear on that was because since we're looking at an additional $50,000 for Fort, I don't know if that, whatever the agreement was with CVB is set in stone, or could we take part of that $50,000 from that increase for them? 'Cause that's a pretty big increase.
That is certainly up to council's conversation today, although I think we indicated to Diane that we would approve that amount on a 1 year basis. So I think we would be going back on that unless council today said we want to rethink it. But again, we are very specific about 1 year and 1 year only. But if you go back and relook at what CVB used to get, they got 47%, and we started pulling them back years ago. So they have managed at a much lower level, and for all the right reasons that we talked about, because you can't have a lot of money show up at the end and then you spend it unwisely.
And, I see them having more opportunity to manage their budget, to plan trips, to advertise things like that than, for instance, the fort that's deteriorating before our eyes. So, I mean, that's to me, an immediate need where CVB could manage their budget to a lesser amount. But I understand y'all have given your word and the commitment was made, and so.
And what we will ask for, she will be making quarterly reports, as usual, Billy. And I think we need to make sure that she's prepared to answer the challenges that are out there and to go into far more detail on what that money is being spent on. I know just several weeks ago, we got a call from the American Way magazine, which is what's put in every seat, you know, on every American airline. And normally a full-page ad in American Way is like $160,000, $70,000. It's huge. They needed somebody, and they gave her the opportunity for $20,000 to run a full-page ad in American Way magazine. When we had the Texas legislative session last week, there were several people who said, I couldn't believe it. I opened up the American Way magazine, and there was an ad for San Angelo in that magazine. Her analytics went up 20% from the day that ad. But so, as much as you can directly account for that money, we certainly want to ask her to, and want to show up the investments as proof of wisely spending. Harry, did you have something? Sorry, dear.
You probably both have beat this horse to death already. So, but I would like to say this. I've been on both boards, both the Fort Board and the Convention and Visitors Bureau Board, and I'm actually the liaison between the city and the CVB right now on that board. So I can see both aspects, but I was part of the negotiation team about 6 or 7 years ago that CVB, when we went from the percentage back to a flat fee, and I know what we did at that particular time. Also say this, even though I'm very, very pleased that this council is investing more money in the fort has multiple sources of revenue, where the CVB only has one, and that's hot tax. And it's directed by the state on what they could use it for. So I would say that we leave it where it is for the time being. Let Diane come and have that conversation with us, a quarterly meeting, and let's just continue to move forward with it. And if the mayor is insistent that we find an additional $50,000 for the fort, then I think we need to see where we can locate that.
You just said we would increase the
Correct.
budget. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Is there any dead horses hanging around that we need to beat up a little bit more?
I don't think so, Mayor. I think we're done.
Okay.
We could go on.
All right, so with that, I think we have finished the hotel occupancy tax fund conversation. We will now go to the civic events fund. And who's talking? Oh, Carl's on.
I'll start out with a little background on the Civic Events Fund. Their revenue is comprised of their allocation of hotel occupancy taxes we just discussed, as well as revenue from the venues. The facility use fee revenue is being proposed to be restricted to fund balance for future capital and maintenance needs, which would require a city council approval. And the increase for O&M will be utilized for just ongoing annual facility maintenance at the venues. The other line in your revenue section includes venue revenue, concessions, advertising and naming rights, and interest income.
What I'm when we go through this, what I want us to do is to take a look at the Blue Book for civic events and where we are by facility already having booked relative to the budget. So, for example, on the Coliseum, right now, year-to-date, we're at $197,608, right?
Yes.
638,
End of June.
right? In revenues, and yet we're planning it at 129,700. So what is going to be so bad in the budget year 2020 that we have to plan it down $80,000 or $70,000.
I believe we did increase it about $12,000.
We did increase the budget by $12,000, but what the mayor is saying is that we're currently at $197,000 as of the end of June. She thinks that will meet the current year budget and exceed it. So why are we not budgeting more than what we expect to receive in the current year?
Because it's basically saying, we don't believe in the Coliseum because we're going to plan down the revenue stream for that by a huge amount of money.
Performances fluctuate year to year.
Well, but the original, wait, so what was the 2018 number for the revenues for the Coliseum? It looks like it was 149,000. So even relative to fiscal year 18, we've planned it down 20,000 from fiscal year 18. So my question is, what is not, in your mind, what is not going to happen that would force us to plan it down that much?
Mayor, if I may, please,
Yes.
very briefly. Tina, in the Blue Book, we have $218,000 on revenues for the Coliseum on the original budget. Okay, and then, so the number is not matching up, and we had been talking about this,
Yeah,
149, so.
We actually talked about this a little bit yesterday. We pulled out all of the ticket fee revenue from all of the venues. And in your spreadsheet that has the column with the actuals year-to-date, it has been pulled out too to make it comparable. But we had to pull out the ticket fee revenue in order to be able to restrict it for
Is that
use.
the facility use fee?
Yes, ma'am.
So the facility use fee is actually the ticket fee.
Yes, ma'am.
In
I'm sorry,
dollars.
maybe I'm not calling it the right label, but yes, that's what.
So if you add the planned dollar amount of 129,700 plus the ticket fee of 133,500, adding those together would equal
No,
what
ma'am.
the plant budget was?
No, ma'am. The ticket fee line includes ticket revenue from all of the venues combined. So about 100,000 of that was in the revenue for the Coliseum.
So 100,000 plus 129, so you're basically planning at 230,000 versus this year's
Right.
plan of
That sounds-
218?
That sounds right, because we did bump it up about 12,000.
Yeah, $12,000.
Okay. So in pure numbers, you're really planning at 230,000 versus actual of 218 if you didn't have the ticket fee, or an increase of $12,000?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, so that answers that one. Okay, and the other question I have is okay, so where's concessions on here?
It's right below the Coliseum.
Auditorium revenue? In the Blue Book it is, but where is it on?
Or in the other, on the
It's in
chart.
the
it's in
other line.
So other, we're planning $100,000. So that's and there's no other line item added to that because it shows that we had a plan for this year's budget of 50,000. We're at 51,000 right now. So we think we're going to pick up another 49,000 in 2 months?
No, ma'am. I read what was included in other earlier. Let me repeat that. In the other line, we're including venue revenues, concessions, advertising and naming rights, and interest income. So,
All right, well, let's go through the venues specifically, and then we'll go and tackle that. Okay, so if you go to the River Stage revenues, so right now, at the River Stage revenue, we are at, right now, 44,290 against a plan of 17,500. So we've had a significant increase, but we're not reflecting that in the River Stage revenue as the new budget.
We did bump it up a little bit, about $5,000. We can look at bumping it up some more.
Well, but it doesn't, okay, again, you're going to have to clarify this because the River Stage in our Blue Book says that we have booked 44,290, so I'm guessing your ticket fees are out of
is
there as well.
part of that, yes. And if you'll look at this sheet that we handed out to you, Mayor, it does have the Blue Book numbers without the ticket fee in it,
Oh, did
in the
we get
year-to-date
that?
column.
I don't have that in my.
Oh, you didn't get that?
We don't have it.
Oh. Oh, okay, sorry, I thought you had it. I thought Kimberly had printed that for you all. Okay, so the amount for the River Stage year-to-date without the ticket revenue is $28,835.
All right, so we are planning it down, not up.
About $10,000.
So why would we do that?
You increased your budget by $5,000. Your actuals, your proposed
over your
budget is
budget, not your
$10,000
actuals.
less than your actual revenue year-to-date.
Why would we do that?
We don't have the confidence we'll bring back all the concerts we had this last year.
But weren't they successful?
The-
If they were successful, and
Yes.
everyone tells me they were successful, everybody was very happy that we exceeded the civic events river stage budget. So there's been lots of positive things said about, look at what we've done. The river stage has exceeded the budget, okay? With that being said, why do we not have the confidence if all those concerts were successful and they were very happy with the results, why would they not be coming back, whether it's promoter A or promoter B or promoter Q?
They haven't booked for this coming fiscal year for different reasons.
They would be, I mean, we have a facility. People think the River Stage is one of the greatest facilities that we have here in San Angelo. We need to make sure we certainly want to continue to grow the business there.
Carl?
Oh, Tom, sorry,
No,
sorry.
But I'm going to help Carl out here a little bit. We've had no less than 3 people that booked at the River Stage trying to book out at the rodeo grounds. We're a totally different nonprofit organization.
Right.
By just the decision of, yeah, we'll do that, or no, we won't, we could take 15, 20,000 out of revenue of what
Right.
Carl's stating here. So
But it would go someplace else.
it
our
would,
facilities.
and there are people that try to circumvent city ticket fees, concession fees, and all of those in the same, so which I get that. But I understand the risk in his budget, and we have kind of backed away from a lot of those and said, no, we don't want to do those things. But with Carl's discussion here in his budget, I can see how you can lose one or gain one.
Yeah.
That'll flip you 20 grand overnight.
Yeah.
So I'm with you, Carl. You know, we hope we carry on success and go like that, but there's lots of these people that have had a very successful one and followed up with a very poor one and lost $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. And now they're talking to several other different venues around the county that are not city or municipality. So I see it. I'm just not making an excuse for anybody, but I'm just saying I see that one, and I feel the risk in that, trying to throw us up a number and then hold their feet to the fire on it, because we could miss it with just a bit.
And I think that's probably good information, and I can accept that. At the same point in time, because we're talking budgets, I think we need to talk about where we've been and what we're planning it, so we as a council better understand if we are at 28.8, but we're planning it at 18, why that would be. That's an explanation. We need that explanation, because the facilities cost money to operate, and so the only way we help maintain these facilities is
Bring in
by
revenue.
bringing in the revenue. And so it is our challenge to understand these facilities and understand what might or might not happen. But I also know sometimes if you plan conservative, you act conservative. And I want it to believe that we have great facilities and we have a great opportunity to book these facilities and bring revenue to the city and beds and heads. So and remember, these increases are relative to budget, not to actual, right? So the $20,000 increase in total revenues is relevant to what, Tina, in terms of actuals right now?
Can you repeat that question, Mayor? I was looking at my slides.
Well, this budget sheet reflects that we're going to pick up $19,729 in revenue
So there's
compared
a-
to the budget. But right now, based off of the fiscal 19 Blue Book, with 2 months remaining, what do you think, even if you plan the next 2 months flat, what would the civic events revenue be?
I'll have to calculate that if you'll give
I
us
think it's
just a minute.
1529095. And so That would be where the 20,000 came up? No.
So the 20,000 is a net impact from a decrease from the transfer in of hotel occupancy tax,
Okay, so
offset
that's
by
not-
an increased venue revenue amount.
Well, not
Some-
really. What you have is the largest fee that you have is an increase in the facility fee that was raised this year. So it went from what, $1 to $2 or?
Some cases from 50 cents to $2,
Right.
some from $1.50 to $2.
So your biggest increases from the fiscal year 19 budget are really from facility use fees, interest, and the other, which is what you're saying is, again, part of the ticket price?
Concessions,
Concessions,
sponsorship, sales.
naming rights.
Advertising, yes. So there was a $25,000 increase to the budget for the facility use fee or ticket fee.
That is relevant to, again, the increased fee.
A lot of it is,
Yeah.
yes.
Pure, saying we sold
Mostly-
the same amount of
mostly
tickets,
just from-
it just
yes.
cost you more money.
Right. And then there was the $23,000 increase to the budget for interest and a $24,000 increase to advertising and naming rights.
And those are pure numbers that will be pure when we look at the 2020 budget?
Yes.
All right, and then, okay, so there's not really an increase in facility use. We're basically planning the use of our facilities to be flat to the budget, not flat to the actual.
That's my understanding. That the increase in that revenue line is due to the increased ticket fee rather than an increased use of the venues. Is that true, Carl, do you think?
Based off of these numbers that are on here would be. Okay, so with that, you're down, planning down capital by 145,590 from the, well, which is the original
was-
fiscal year budget.
Yeah, so the 145,590 was the amount that, when we gave them their expenditure target for fiscal year 19, we did not increase it. And so because of the 48% being more than what they actually received for operational purposes in the previous year, we put that extra amount beyond what their expenditure target was into a contingency account. And that contingency account that they can use for capital or maintenance or whatever at the venues, but would need to be approved at the city manager level.
City manager, not city council.
For the contingency, it's at city manager level, and for the current, or for the 2020 proposed budget, we've actually allowed that additional, what we're now calling facility use fee, or the maintenance that was kind of being replaced by this amount to fall to fund balance, and that will require city council approval to use it.
Out of fund balance.
Yes, ma'am. It'll be restricted within the fund balance.
Basically, just like we've done in the past, they came before the council and said, we need the money to do these particular projects.
Yes.
Okay.
Any further questions on Civic Events Fund? Yes, Gilly?
Expenditures or revenues?
Yes, either or.
Okay. On the operations and maintenance, budgeted at 757 plus thousand, what does that include, Carl?
It includes increases in different accounts to help enhance maintenance at particularly the Coliseum, the Convention Center, and the pavilions or River
Does
Stage.
that include like a roof or
No, these are just ongoing, just day-to-day.
day-to-day maintenance?
Day-to-day maintenance.
And utilities.
Yes.
And then what we talked about, Billy, is they will bring back to us
Yes.
things that, let's say, repairs to the restrooms at the River Stage. They will come back with numbers on that, which we can choose to fund out of the fund balance, et cetera. So any additional over than regular operational will come back for
Right.
funding, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And we plan on coming back in the next few months on the River Stage.
I think the river stage is one of the greatest assets we have. People really enjoy it. And what we really need to focus on how to make that a strong facility. Council, do I have any further questions for Carl on this budget? No. With that, we will end that conversation, and we will now move into the COSA DC or something.
Yes.
Is
Development
that right?
Corporation, yes, ma'am.
I gotta find my.
We have two slides for the Development Corporation, the first slide being the economic development side, and the second slide being the ballot side of that revenue source. Of course, the Development Corporation is funded through our Type B sales tax, which is 0.5% of the state sales, or the sales tax that we charge to our citizen, or to visitors and citizens, excuse me. So this first slide, the main changes for the development corporations, or the things I want to point out, are that currently we have sales and use tax in line with what we're budgeting on the city side. We, of course, have not approved a city budget yet, and so any changes that we make to sales tax will also change for the development corporation in correlation with that number.
So if in fact we choose and plan to reflect sales tax revenue down 6%, then this sales and use tax on this budget would go down 6% from the 2019 actuals.
Yes, ma'am, because the development corporation receives 0.5% and the city receives 1%, we would budget exactly 1/2 of what the city budgets here in the development
This is kind of a
corporation.
fluctuating number in terms of the sales tax revenue.
Right, and when I did present this to their board, I did explain that to them, that any changes to sales tax would reflect what the city budgets, and any changes on the expenditure side that would need to be increased or decreased, we would just pull from future projects or add it back to it.
Okay.
So the other changes here are that we are allocating differently our staff services and our utilities and things like that at the BRC. In the past, we had allocated a portion of that to the ballot side. We are no longer doing that because staff does not really spend any time, because most of the ballot initiatives have been fulfilled. And so that's the major change here. And I'll go through, let's see, I think that's about it. One other thing that we do need to discuss is that I don't think, as of last I knew, that the contract with the chamber had been finalized. So we currently have it budgeted at the amount of the current contract, which is $225,000. Again, any changes there would be reflected in the proposed budget by the time we bring it back to you.
And those expenditures go into personnel? That budget? Where do you reflect
Those
it
are
on this
in
budget?
O&M.
O&M.
In O&M, okay, so that could still be a fluctuating number, correct?
That's correct.
All right, so, and you explained the personnel increase based off of assigning those numbers a new
They're just being
account.
allocated differently, yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Mayor, you'll
Out of
see
the
a
budget.
similar decrease on the next page
Yeah, on the
that
development
offsets that.
ballot side.
On the
so-
ballot side.
Okay. All right, so does council have any questions on the revenue and expense side here? Again, a lot of these numbers are fluctuating numbers because we haven't determined sales tax budget numbers, so that has flexibility in it. But the rent number would be correct. Your interest is from your fund balance, your transfers in and out. Your personnel is compensated for on the ballot side, and your O&M is up 136,000, and that is what?
It's comprised of several things. First of all, we'll be getting a pickup so that we can travel back and forth to Industrial Park as we begin our Phase 2.2. There's slight increases in our insurance, about $5,000. We'll have additional $6,000 in expenses for improvements in our IT department, going to new software and replacing equipment. We'll have additional travel as a result of being in several new organizations, the High Ground of Texas, Texas Midwest Community Network, and previously we hadn't accounted for being in the I-14 Coalition
additional 15,000. So those comprise about $45,000 worth of additional memberships. And then again, included in that's our staff services contract. It increased about $53,000.
Staff services is the chamber.
No, staff services is, all of our services are provided by city staff, so that includes the attorney, real estate, public information, city manager's office, city clerk, internal audit, finance, information technology, purchasing, billing receipts, human resources,
So
and
that's up how
communications.
much in dollars?
$53,000.
23?
$53,000.
Well, that's huge.
That amount, I'm sorry.
No, you go
I was going to say that amount is actually determined through a study, and it's part of our indirect cost allocation plan, where we allocate administrative type functions in the general fund out to all of our funds, including the Development Corporation.
Everybody gets a little ding.
Yes.
That's right. That's correct. So spread over that number.
Trying to
of-
make yourself look really good and pushing it down the road to them, is that right?
It helps support the functions of the general fund.
Right. And we do have an opportunity to comment on any of those as they provide us that allocation, and we feel, and our board feels, that those are reasonable increases.
I think the city council expense is also allocated through that process. So the time you spend working COSA DC issues gets worked into that process also.
Well, we're lowly paid, so that won't be a big impact. I won't hit it very hard.
It was $1.50 increase.
You had that conversation from somebody outside of San Angelo. They said, "You do what for that kind of money?"
We're not county commissioners, are we? Okay, so with that, is there any further question? None? And so I would assume the same thing on the ballot side, because a lot of the ballot side entries are just transfers from that sheet. Okay, then, if all, I believe we have completed, thank you, Guy. We have completed this budget workshop session, correct? That's correct. Yes. Do I have an adjournment?
Before we adjourn,
Yes.
Mayor?
Oh, wait a minute, Billy.
I just have a question for Tina. Tina, if I take a look at the last one we just went over and how you have, lumped certain things together, is there a way, taking a look at my blue book, for me to be able to correlate that? I think for me it would go a lot smoother next time, if I didn't have to ask. And I finally stopped asking what's all in this because, it just delayed things and the mayor already slapped my hand.
We would like to provide more detail on these slides, but the slides get too busy, and so we do have to sort of summarize them in some way. But yes, we can provide you kind of a map.
If what you do is just, for example, under, if you would go to, like, for example, the Water Enterprise Fund, for example, if you were combining them, if you did underneath that, the department 4200, 4201, 4303 added together.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just use those fund numbers reflecting what is added together, then it tells us to look at those 3 columns or those 5 or those 6 or whatever.
We can definitely provide something that will help.
Thank you so much.
No problem. You're welcome.
And all in favor? Thank you, everybody. Job well done.